So I'm gonna go ahead and assume everyone watching this has seen Dunkey's Octopath Traveler review. I'm also gonna assume that you all know there's a noticeable little negative reaction to it going on. Not a majority by any means, but the video bothered me enough to make a 20-minute response to it, so keep that in mind. 2 days after the video went up, and only a few hours after my video went up, Dunkey responded to the criticism on his official subreddit, which is also where someone apparently posted my video as well, but it was taken down before I even knew someone had done it. Before I get into the response itself, I want to say that I respect his decision to politely respond to the criticism. He didn't throw a fit, he didn't insult his fans, he just explained himself a bit further. Which he should have done in the video, but I talked about that already. I should also say that this is going to be more of a hot take than the last video, less technical game design-y talk, more improvised, more all that. And again, I haven't played Octopath Traveler, I just think that Dunkey's video sucked. So let's start with the title, Octopath Traveler Review Discussion. So does anyone want to leave more comments saying the video wasn't a review, or that Dunkey doesn't do reviews at all? I offer you now to leave a comment saying that. Seems a lot of people are upset with my Octopath Traveler video, and while it's a pretty grumpy assessment I'll admit, it is my honest opinion from what I played, which was about 10 hours and having beat chapter 1 for each character. Your opinion is not what was dishonest, Dunkey. What was dishonest was this.
Okay, now do that 50 times and you can fight the next boss.
And this.
This dude got halfway through the game and put his review up. What the fuck?
Again, nobody is mad that you didn't like the game. I mean, I'm sure some people are, but nobody gives a shit about them. People are mad about the part that you are admitting right here in this sentence. You played at absolute most a quarter of the game, yet never disclosed that fact until now. Let me play this one more time for emphasis.
This dude got halfway through the game and put his review up. What the fuck?
I'm sorry if you felt misled by the video, but like nearly all of my videos, some things are exaggerated or taken out of context to make the video more entertaining. Dunkey, people who've never played Octopath Traveler do not know that they have been misled, unless they're in my personal little minority of people who doubted what you said was true and looked into it themselves. Your video has over 1.5 million views, and I can guarantee the vast majority of those people have not played the game or done research like I have. There is no feeling misled. You misled people who are still misled, and people who will continue to be misled. You haven't even admitted to any specific instances of misleading information in your video, probably because you know you can't defend them. This idea that all of your videos have exaggerations and jokes in them doesn't work when no one can tell you're exaggerating how long the combat takes unless they've actually played the game. There are plenty of comedy reviewers on YouTube who make more legitimate reviews than this. Also, funnier reviews than this.
Gameplay aside, Morrowind could be described as an early 2000s slave trade RPG.
But overall, I think I very faithfully represented the game how it actually is, from my perspective. Do I actually have to explain why this is dumb? Can I just assume we all know how much of an asshole this is to defend himself, and that nobody is going to say this is a legitimate defense? Dunkey, video game reviews are not novels. They are not films, they are not paintings. The world of video game reviewing does not need abstraction to be portrayed properly. Let me get a little pretentious here, you'll see what I'm talking about in a second. Pride and Prejudice starts with the line, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Because Jane Austen is speaking from the cultural perspective of 19th century England. She is purposely bending the truth in order to portray the thoughts of rich motherfuckers in that time period, because that idea is a part of the entire novel. You are not Jane Austen. You are reviewing a piece of software. Yet what you seem to be saying here is that the most accurate way you know to portray your perspective is to bend reality so hard that the uninformed can't even tell you're doing it. The "Your Excellency" bit is one where anyone can tell you're exaggerating. They look at the words on the screen and see you're cutting out dialogue. The issue there was that the exaggerated joke part was the only evidence you supplied for your argument of the dialogue being bad. But in the case of combat, you were just lying. That's it. You lied. Admit it. Not this half-assed, sorry you feel that way, non-apology shit. Like I said in the video, there are positive elements in the game. The soundtrack and visual style are very good. So why didn't you say any of that? Why didn't you add another 30 seconds into your video and mention the game's merits directly? I'm genuinely confused. You reviewed a game, but left out points as big as the soundtrack and the visuals? The combat system has promise, and shines more so during boss fights. So why didn't you say any of that? Why didn't you show any of the boss fights? It's a JRPG. I think a lot of people care about the boss fights and would like to hear about them. One more time, why is your review less than 4 minutes long? But a lot of my time playing Octopath felt like a waste, with the game forcing me to fight the same trash mobs over and over again. Most JRPGs are guilty of this, but I don't see why it's not a point worth criticizing when some in the genre are attempting to overcome it. Because you didn't address anything within Octopath Traveler's actual mechanics. You criticized it for having random encounters and trash mobs, nothing else. Why is your review less than 4 minutes long? In Earthbound, if you go into a fight where you are blatantly overpowered, the fight is just skipped entirely. In Persona 5, which has a similar combat system to Octopath, the fights are meant to whittle down your party as you race against the clock to reach the end of a dungeon. Yes, Dunkey, all of that is correct. A lot of JRPGs could stand to learn from how Earthbound handles weak enemies. And yes, battles in Persona 5 are meant to use up your resources as dungeons go on. But so are all random battles in RPGs? Like all RPGs? I went over this in my last video, I won't repeat it all, but I will repeat this. Dunkey does not understand game design and has not tried to. Only in Persona 5, where the player is handed a literal time limit for dungeon completion, does he recognize the purpose of random battles. Not only that, but he calls the combat of Persona 5 and Octopath Traveler similar. Why is your review only 4 minutes long? There's probably still more to talk about, so I'll be here today if you guys want to talk more about the game or my review. Dunkey has since made exactly 2 comments on the subject. I have a pretty simple method of discerning bad from good games in my reviews. If I lost interest and didn't complete the game, it's probably bad to mediocre. And if it held my attention through to the end, it's probably good. This isn't correct by any standard. There are so many games out there that start incredibly slow and uninteresting. Morrowind starts with a 15-minute agonizingly slow walk from one town to another, with nothing happening in between except maybe a frustrating fight with a rat or a bug. But it's a beloved game that, over the past month or so, I've come to really appreciate. The latter half of the game made the intentions of the slow first half so much clearer, and that hindsight is so important to so many games. The same logic applies to most RPGs in some sense. You're supposed to feel weak at the start. It contextualizes the entire experience as your party gets stronger and you go from this average weak character to a max level wrecking ball. This is even thematic in Morrowind. Your character goes from some weak nobody to a god who can fly across the map faster than the fast travel system, in a plot about a weak nobody becoming a god.
Instead of trying and failing to engineer grand battles or impressive scripted events, Morrowind puts the burden of spectacle on the player. You actually feel like you're a reincarnated god king, because by the end of the game you're flying between cities and teleporting across the map, and you actually have a frame of reference to know how awesome that is, because in the beginning you had to take the bus like everyone else. At the end of Morrowind's main quest, all the NPCs talk to you differently. The hostile Sixth House followers start acting polite, a whole enemy type just drops dead all of a sudden, and you entirely wipe one of the weather conditions out of the system.
10 hours into a 50 to 60 hour RPG is nowhere near long enough to overcome that curve. I can fully understand why someone would lose patience with it, but if you don't have the patience to give the game a chance, then don't review it. It's obviously not a perfect system, but I think it keeps my reviews more honest than most. Let's say I reviewed Morrowind after playing only the first 10 hours. I put in my review, this game is so boring, you have to walk slowly everywhere for the entire game. I don't clarify that I only played 10 hours, I don't do any research into the way the game speeds up as it goes along. That's not honesty, Dunkey. That's laziness at best and deception at worst. That you see it as honesty is shocking to me. I worded that kind of poorly in my Game Critics video. I don't think you need to play a game all the way through to review a game or have an opinion on one, but you should play enough to get a grasp on what the game has to offer. And you didn't. This is clear from the number of comments and posts about your video talking about all the things the game has to offer that you never mentioned, because you never saw them. Yet you criticized them anyway. I regret to inform you, but you can't make sweeping statements about characters being generic and boring when you haven't even finished half their story arcs in a story-driven game. And you know what? On some level, I agree that you don't have to finish a game to review it. If you play the first half of Sonic 06, you no longer have to give the developers any credit, considering Sonic will have clipped through a wall about 14 times by that point. You can safely assume that the bugs aren't intentional and that the game isn't going to get any better. Your review would be better if you finished it, but you don't have to. But your argument was not that Octopath is an unfinished mess. Your argument was, I played a quarter of the game at most and didn't like it, so the whole thing must be bad. Even though I'm not a huge fan of the genre, I've played my fair share of JRPGs, and usually the first 10 hours is very representative of the entire experience. This might not be the case with Octopath, as I see a lot of people saying the game starts to pick up after the Chapter 2 quests. I don't even have to say anything about this. He's admitting it himself. He reviewed the game before even reaching Chapter 2, the part of the game it seems most people agree is where it gets more interesting. I'm not going to waste my time. My reason for being upset with the GameSpot guy's Crash Bandicoot review is that he wasn't compelled enough to finish any of the 3 games on the collection, and his review paints them as poorly designed games. Yet he still gives the game a 6, which is technically a positive score on their scale. That's the part you took issue with? Dunkey, I regret to inform you, but calling a game good and saying you weren't compelled to finish it are not contradictory claims. You can look at the qualities of a game, note its positives, and still not feel compelled to finish it for reasons of personal taste. I've never felt compelled to finish Baldur's Gate, but at the very least I won't call it a bad game, because I understand my own shortcomings. I know I have a hard time getting into these older RPGs, especially D&D style ones, partially because I've played a lot of real D&D and will always prefer it. I personally wouldn't review Baldur's Gate without finishing it, but remember saying this?
The best reviews are entirely subjective, but that doesn't mean you throw objectivity out the window. You have to build your case with honest statements that even someone who disagrees with you could relate to.
If you genuinely believe that you spoke honestly about Octopath, then I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be a games critic. In response, someone posted this. I'm not going to unpack this entire comment, but let's see how Dunkey responds. I didn't really consider my video a full review, more of an impressions video, but enough people interpreted it as a review that it doesn't matter anymore. Number 1, you tagged it Dunkview from day 1. If you wanted people to see it as first impressions, it would have taken 1 second to put first impressions in the title, and a couple more seconds to say, I only played 10 hours in the video itself. Number 2,
and then you have this fucking shitty rat race to be the first review on Metacritic so that your dumbass website can get more traffic, and the end result is a column of weak-ass first impressions.
Number 3, they didn't probably interpret it as a review. You presented it as a review in almost every way. Don't act as though it's unreasonable to have considered it one. In this scenario, it would be me reading about a quarter of the book, but video games aren't books. As mentioned, video game reviews are not books either. Aside from that, I don't see what the distinction between games and books has to do with the issue. You still reviewed it without finishing it. There's no other qualifiers. You didn't even see half the game's content before declaring it bad to your millions of subscribers. No logical loopholing will help you worm your way out of that. A lot of them, JRPGs especially, are loaded with tons of filler content, like fighting trash mobs over and over again. I've already gone over in the last video why this is bullshit, so I won't do it again, but suffice to say, Dunkey doesn't understand what trash mobs exist for. Games usually don't, if ever, dramatically shift in quality 10 hours in. The fact that they usually don't doesn't mean they never do. He throws in this if ever to cover his ass some more, but plenty of games get better as they go on. Plenty of games get worse as they go on. Persona 5's first story arc is pretty strong, but in my opinion, and the opinions of many others, every subsequent arc is substantially weaker. Reviewing something is more complex than good or bad, or a number out of 10 rating, or a recommendation versus a non-recommendation. If I recommended Persona 5 with only the first story arc in mind, I'd be ignoring the drop in quality I and others believe the game has. Even if Octopath does improve, 10 hours is still a significant chunk of the game that feels underwhelming, and what a horrible idea to put the worst section at the beginning of the game. At this point, I don't think I even have to refute what he says. It's clear he's just trying to damage control, and all I'd be doing is repeating myself. Instead, for the sake of due diligence, I'm going to mention a comment he made a few hours before making his big post directly to the subreddit. Dunkey has not posted anything more about Octopath at time of writing. I went pretty far out of my way to make the snail fight much faster than a usual encounter. I even cut out a big chunk of that fight, which was actually 2 snails and 2 bird guys. Joey, can I get a background groan going on while I respond to this one? Just like a kind of quiet one in the background while I'm talking? Thanks, Joey. Once again, Dunkey, you purposely made the part of the fight you showed slower in every way possible. I do not care that there were more enemies than you showed. I don't know if you killed them and then removed the rest of your party for the final snail. I don't know how long that fight took, and I don't know if you used enemy weaknesses during it. But if you're going to say that enemy encounters are mindless and too easy, you can't cut out all the hard parts? Like, remember in your Dark Souls videos where you'll suddenly cut to the last hit of a boss and say you killed it in 1 hit? Remember when that was a joke and not a serious point in a review? Oh god, guys, look, I don't like doing this. I don't like sitting here and having to decide if Dunkey is lying or if his perspective is actually this warped. Because I've been watching Dunkey since I was 15 years old. There are Dunkey jokes I've said so many times and for so long that I forget they're Dunkey jokes. They're just a part of my sense of humor now. That's how much of a goddamn fanboy I am. I don't know how to end this video. I don't know what my ultimate point with all this is. All I can say is there are dozens of reviewers out there worth watching right now who work hard to do what they do right. Don't settle.